My name's Adele Jones, and I'm really excited to be here chairing this session, Soil Sisters, this morning. We've got some amazing soil sisters on the panel. We also have a soil brother. I'm super excited about soil. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a self-confessed soil nerd, and I think my fellow panelists probably have some similar tendencies. Why are we so excited about soil? I think soil is probably one of the biggest untapped opportunities for the climate solution. It represents the second largest bank of soil bank of carbon on planet Earth. It's actually twice as big as the atmosphere, second only to the oceans. So it's an incredibly important resource and an incredibly important part of our climate solution. Soil also is home to 25% of global biodiversity. And I think we all forget sometimes when we're walking through a field or along a path and perhaps you're just thinking about the dirt under your feet, that actually a teaspoon of soil holds more microbes than there are people on planet Earth. I think that fact always kind of blows my mind. And yet the way we are managing our soils globally is degrading them significantly. Soil loss through carbon costs us $10 trillion per year in damage. And of course, soil is not only a carbon store, but it's also something that communities around the world rely on for their well-being, for their health, for their diversity. So it's an incredibly, incredibly important topic that I think is truly unrepresented on the top table at the Leaders Summit last week. I am Deputy Chief Executive of an organisation called the Sustainable Food Trust. A quick intro to the Sustainable Food Trust. We're a small UK not-for-profit, but we work internationally to accelerate the transition to more sustainable food and farming systems. And so soil represents a huge part of our work in helping farmers transition to the types of farming systems which can regenerate our soils instead of degrading them. So I'm really excited to be here today. I have some amazing panelists here to my right. Arizona MUSE is a world-renowned model and has worked with many of the major top brands around the world. You may have seen her on several covers of Vogue, which is incredible, but she has also a passion for biodynamic agriculture, regenerative agriculture, education. So really excited to be hearing from you, Arizona. We have Julia Jackson here, who is the founder of Grounded, a not-for-profit dedicated to earth-based solutions. And we also have Bruce LaScelles, who is a soil scientist at the British Society of Soil Scientists. Yeah. So there's a couple of panelists who are not here, but I would also like to mention. Adanike Oldasu is an ecofeminist initiator of Fridays for the Future in Nigeria, and Lana Wiginat is also a climate activist. She's the vice youth chair of the UN Food Systems Summit Action Track on Sustainable Consumption. So we're sad that they can't be here. I think they've both had travel issues, but if they join late, then we will welcome them with open arms. But without further ado, let's get on to the conversation. So I'm going to invite each of the panelists just to say a little bit about themselves and why they are passionate about soil, why they feel it's part of the solution. So Arizona, over to you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me here to talk about my favorite subject. So much fun. As Adele said, I've been a model for 12 years. I then became an activist, and through my activism, I educated myself about mostly the fashion industry, started by learning what impacts my industry was having, where the clothes were coming from, who was making them, what that was like for them, the whole supply chain, and obviously you can imagine what I learned. It was pretty negative. There wasn't much positive anything to learn about the supply chain of fashion. And it all kept bringing me back to soil, where everything was grown. Because our fashion is grown, just like our food is grown. But do we ever stop and say, thank you so much, farmers, for growing my clothes for me? But we need to. So I invite everyone now, from this moment onward, if you haven't been already, start appreciating that farmers grow our clothes. Share that concept, because there are so many conversations. Look, UN Food Summit. What if you're not a food farmer? How could you're kind of left out of the farming conversation if you're not farming food in many cases. So I started a charity called Dirt, and Dirt regenerates soil globally by supporting biodynamic farming projects all over the globe. And the reason I'm focusing on biodynamics is because, one, it's protected by a certification, which I find really important. I think it's going to become increasingly more and more important, because I'm a little worried that the word regenerative may have a similar future as the word sustainable, which right now is, it's been watered down and it's been really mishandled by a lot of people. Many people use it in a strong way and in the right way, but many people don't, and we can't regulate that. So Demeter is the name of the certifying body who protects the standard of biodynamic farming. The second reason that I wanted to focus on biodynamics is because biodynamics uses all the techniques of regenerative, crop rotation, intercropping, cytropic growing, all of these things, building soil fertility, composting, using animals. Using is such a bad word, isn't it? Inviting animals into the farm, welcoming them, respecting them, treating them with deep acknowledgement of their inner life and who they are and their nature. But it also, biodynamics sees that plants, I like to look at a plant when I say this part, but we don't have any plants in here. So imagine a plant in your head right now. Plants have a physical form. They photosynthesize, they feed off of microbes in the soil. Even no matter how micro that is, it's still a physical activity. But inside the plant, there's something undeniably there that keeps it alive that isn't physical. We will never be able to touch it, but it's there. A dead plant looks very different than a live plant. I will look very different when I die than I do right now. And so biodynamics farms the life within the plant, and therefore the life within the soil, the life within the animal, the life within the human, and the life within the being of the earth, and connects and harmonizes all of these life forces with the planets around the earth that undeniably have influence on the earth as they pass over. That's what I think is super cool about biodynamics. It was designed nearly 100 years ago for climate change, drawing on wisdoms from traditional agriculture around the world and peasant farming in Europe to prepare us for climate change that was inevitably coming because of the way we were treating the earth. Go ahead.
Amazing. Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Julia Jackson. I'm founder of Grounded, an organization dedicated to grassroots communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, like Indigenous communities, the triangulation of those communities with legislative reform, like stopping ecocide, rights of nature, with applied mapping and conservation, keystone species preservation, and basically not seeing ourselves as the most important species on the planet, but that we're interdependent, and there's other critical non-human allies that we also need to defend. So those are the areas more earth-based that we focus on, and actually my teammate Michelle's right here, yay. And I come from a family wine business, so I grew up in a business started by my mother and father, Jackson Family Wines, and I lost my father 9 years ago, but growing up he instilled in me, because I'd take walks through the vineyards every day, and reciprocity and values that we often forget, and you take care of the land and it will take care of you, and the symbiotic relationship between us and soil. And we have some biodynamic vineyards, actually, so I love biodynamic as well. And I know the certification well, and it's about a living system, and it's about looking at the land as a whole, and not something to own, but to be co-creating with. And soil itself, I'm very passionate about, because actually the name Grounded for my organization, my dear friend Louis Schwartzberg, who is on my advisory board, made a film called Fantastic Fungi, and about mycelial networks with an amazing human being Paul Stamets, who's a mycologist. And I learned all about what's untapped underground, under soil. And the name grounded actually came from a conversation with Louis, who made the film. And he was like, you know, I feel like your organization is about our unsung underground heroes, those that are grounded underground, like the mycelial networks. And then it clicked for me. I'm like, oh, grounded. And so it actually came from a conversation on soil and how powerful mycelial networks are for carbon sequestration. And if we think about biodiversity, we can't think about it without the diversity of mycelial networks and fungi, because the relationships between mycelial networks and the roots of plants, because 90% of plants on this earth have a relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. We can't sequester and photosynthesize carbon as efficiently. So those relationships, and it's really beautiful, need to be intact. So we do a lot to support our unsung heroes of keystone species, not just keystone animal species, but keystone plant species like mycelial networks as well. So we at Grounded amplify through media, video, storytelling, solutionists, getting their stories out there, getting more funding to them, and getting them out to the world. So that is Grounded. In essence, I'm taking a sabbatical from my family wine business, because if we don't have a planet, we won't have wine, but more importantly, we might not have a lot of our species. And so, and I also, the climate crisis is very personal for me. I lost my home to the Kincaid fire 2 years ago. And it's been quite a journey because out in California, we've experienced mega fire after mega fire after mega fire. And the fires are no longer just wildfires. They're actually burning so hot that they're generating their own tornadoes called firenadoes because of the heat vortex. And so I'm lucky to be alive. I feel really lucky losing everything really makes me appreciate the small things in life, and it deepened my commitment to the solutions and finding the solutions of the climate crisis. And through that despair and loss and renewal from the fire, I feel a deepened sense of purpose. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how I follow all those introductions, and there's so much that resonates there as well. So I'm Bruce LaScelles. I'm a soil scientist, and I'm also the current president of the British Society of Soil Science, and also vice president of the International Union of Soil Sciences as well. So two very, very important bodies in the world of soil science. But I think, you know, one of the key aspects, one of the things I'm trying to drive in my presidency is the voice of soils, because for too long, definitely the soil science community have been academic based, have been male, have been ageing, and I don't think they've engaged and properly sought out how that science, how that knowledge they're generating actually can be implemented, can be used for the benefit. And I don't take nothing away from the quality of the science. It is getting implemented, but there is definitely, or has been, a disconnect between them. And all the things that you've said around soil, you know, so important. And as a soil science, I put soil at the centre of everything. Everything relies on soil. And that's one of the things as a society that we're trying to do, is trying to, you know, we have a practitioner arm, but we're also sort of trying to talk about soil in terms of everyone who uses and relies on soils. That's our audience. Those are the people we need to be connecting with. And I think language has been an issue for us, and I know there was some reference there to some of the terminologies that have been used. But even just stepping away from soil, we've had ecosystem services, we've had natural capital, and we're now on nature-based solutions. And I think we need, as a community, to really kind of consolidate that language, define what we mean. And the natural world is so hugely complex. And I'm not saying the atmospheric world isn't complex, but for climate scientists, they've got this really lovely, neat, single phrase, 1.5 degrees C. Everyone can understand that. Everyone can look at a single graph and see where we are on the line towards achieving that. But for the natural world, we've got such complexity, and we haven't yet worked out how do we define that. What's the buzzword? And unfortunately, we need a buzzword. And because we've chopped and changed a little bit through ecosystem services, natural capital, etc., they all essentially mean the same thing. They're all trying to get the same message across, but we've not quite nailed that. So I'm here in Glasgow. We put an application in from the society to become an official observer and an NGO at COP, and we were accepted. So I've been able to get into the Blue Zone and hear some of the conversations that are going on, and everything that I've heard this morning, and that I'm sure no doubt you all buy into and believe in, is being talked about in COP. And Saturday was the Nature and Land Use Day, and it was a phenomenal day to be out. The people speaking from ministers from countries around the world to leaders of indigenous groups, all coming across with the same message. I think the challenge is, how do we keep that conversation going? How do we keep that reference to the natural world going in this climate debate? Because it very, very quickly shifts back to climate and to carbon. And there were some really clear messages that have come out from COP that maybe haven't made it into the news as well, that, phrases like, we have to go beyond carbon. Innovation, technologies, they will advance, and we'll get to place where we can reduce embodied carbon in what we build and what we make, that we can suck carbon dioxide and methane out of the atmosphere, we can stop it getting into the atmosphere. But the message I've been trying to promote, and I'm hoping as an NGO I get an opportunity to speak tomorrow at COP within the Blue Zone to make a statement particularly on soils and the importance of soils. Mm-hmm. But the importance is that technology will do things for us and will help us solve the problem of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But we live in a world that is changed. We live in a world that will continue to change, and that change has negative impacts, and some of us may not feel it. And I did a kind of a live from COP back to my organisation yesterday, and I sort of gave a little flavour of what it felt like to be there. But I also said I felt a slight level of unease being in the Blue Zone. We were in this safe space, protected. You could hear the rain, you could hear the helicopters, you couldn't hear the protesters, and there were lots of people there who. Lots of people who should have been there, should have had a voice, probably weren't there and didn't have a voice. And as COP, it stands for Conference of the Parties. If not everyone's there, if not everyone's got that voice, then will those changes really happen? Will we really solve the fundamental issues that have affected our environment and will go on affecting our environment? And that has a negative impact on communities, on society, on the world, basically. And we've got to solve that in tandem, in combination with the carbon issue. And there was a really important call yesterday, which was the Adaptation Day, and a really strong call from lots of ministers around the world that we need to be spending equitably between mitigation for climate change and adaptation, because we can mitigate all we like, but we still live in a world that is, as we've heard, changing and causing hugely, disruptive and horrible things to communities around the world. And if I just finish, there's a really nice saying from a professor called Professor Ratan Lal about the soil life nexus, and I think it comes from someone who used to lead the soil survey at the USDA, and it's about the soil life nexus. There is no life without soil, and there's no life without soil. Sorry, I get this right. There's no life without soil, and there's no soil without life. Absolutely interdependent, and that's the message that I'm hoping gets out there. But also then, sorry, I said I finished. But we want to talk. I want to talk about soil, but I need to make sure I'm not in a silo, because soil relates to water, ecology, biodiversity, food, fibre, etc. So I need to make sure, from my part, I'm not sitting in a silo saying I'm a soil scientist and that's what I'm going to talk about as well.
Thank you all. I mean, yeah, that's amazing provocations. Thank you. I want to build a little on what you've just been talking about, Bruce. Coming into COP26, I have to say I felt quite pessimistic about the fact that soils, and our kind of active management of soils through food and farming was really missing from the top agenda at COP. I mean, there's been some amazing side sessions going on. There's been some work on Nature Day, which is really encouraging. But why wasn't it, part of the core agenda on Monday and Tuesday last week? I really hope we can change that going forward. And so I just wanted to ask the panel why they think that is. And from my perspective, obviously there's, you could say there's a lack of data about the role of soils and soil carbon sequestration, although my mantra is on that, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But I actually think it comes down to storytelling as well. And so I just want to also bring the conversation a little back to why we're here today for the She Changes Climate campaign, because I actually think it's those women around the world who are the stewards of our soil who are going to be the ones who can tell the best stories about its importance. But I just wanted to ask the panel what their views were on why soil as a solution to climate change is missing from the conversation. And just to add one thing, although the IPCC recognises the importance of soil and is starting to touch on the role of soil carbon sequestration as a mitigation strategy, the UK Climate Change Committee does not yet recognise it as part of the climate change solution, which to me is just, mind-blowing. So, I'll go to you, Julia, first.
I just got to COP 2 days ago, so I can't speak from experience. Today will be my first day in the blue zone, actually. But I think that terms like nature-based solutions, of course, are important, but I worry that they're going to become like sustainability, and so I really try and instill earth-based and like values of the earth within our work. And I feel like soil and a lot of the planet is not treated with the reverence it deserves, and we have this othering tendency. So I can't speak specifically to why soil isn't at COP, but one thing I think in terms of the science of soil that I get excited about is, and when I feel a little bit of the doom and gloom creep in about the climate crisis, which is not all the time, but sometimes I get overwhelmed, I think about a conversation I had with Paul Hawken, who wrote Drawdown, and 100 Solutions to Reverse Climate Change, and the Amazon was burning, I think, a few years ago. And I'm like, Paul, please tell me a solution you're the most optimistic about. And he said, actually, soil. Because he said, I can't really speak to how much carbon specifically it could sequester, but the studies out there show that in terms of atmospheric carbon, if we scale up regenerative agriculture and biodynamics and treat the soil with deeper reverence, that it could sequester 1 trillion tons, potentially, if scaled, of CO2, which would put us back to 1870 pre-industrial levels of ppm in the atmosphere.
Easy.
And so, I know, and so in theory, because I'm a dreamer, I'm like, oh my God, we just need to like get behind that. And yet we've got industrial farming, loss of topsoil, and all these things working against us. However, why shouldn't we try to like reduce ppm? And I think soil is a massive solution to the climate crisis. And from our textiles to our food, there's so much untapped underground. And I think we need to honor that soil is one of the biggest solutions to the climate crisis. And and I'll wrap up. But I was born in the year 1988, and I find it interesting because I Googled, because I saw on Greta's Instagram, she posted born with, I forget how many ppm in the atmosphere, but she says that in her bio, so I was curious, so I Googled mine. I'm like, I wonder what the ppm is for 1988. I Googled it, and it was 350. And
Me too, then.
oh,
Yeah.
and I just got really interested, because once you start thinking about atmospheric carbon and ppm, because I didn't know this until a few years ago. So ppm in the atmosphere, parts per million, We're at about 420. It fluctuates. The point of absolutely no return, I'm told, maybe you know better than I do, but is 450. And we're pumping up 3 to 4 ppm per year, which is the equivalent, 1 ppm is equivalent to 8 billion tons. So we're pumping up basically like 34, 32, 34 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. And so we need our soil to draw that down. We can't just convert to renewable energy and electric cars and paper straws and expect that the planet's going to be okay. Meanwhile, the ppm, all the carbon and methane and nitrous oxide in the atmosphere is going to be continuing to warm the planet. We have to draw it down. And the only way to do that is really through honoring our oceans and carbon sinks and soil. So I think it's important, it's an imperative solution that absolutely must be talked about at COP. Sorry, that was
Thank you,
a
Julia.
bit long.
No, that's really great. And Bruce, if I can go to you, and if we can keep it fairly short, because I think we're running out of time, that would be great.
Yeah, maybe just come back to, you know, I made the reference to the voice of soil, and I think that's really important, and everyone needs to be involved in it. So it's been really good working with Emma and Earth Minutes. We produced our short video, which is called #Grounded, because grounded is such a great term, and work with some great people like Lizzie Daly and so on. And what we're also trying to work with the arts community as well. So we're working with two really great people, Jude and Isla, who are looking at soil voices and soil in the written word as well, and soil stories. And it's about getting people to get that connection back. And that's definitely doesn't sit in the domain of one demographic. That's everyone has to be involved in getting that message out there.
Thank you. Arizona?
I think that one of the reasons that soil's not in the major mainstream conversation is because it seemingly at first looks like there's not much money in soil regeneration and that as a solution for climate change, and because capital likes to get behind solutions, it likes to get behind solutions where there's going to be a big return, or at least it looks like there's going to be a big return, and so many people are so clever at making returns look like they're going to happen when you have big machines involved, that there's that whole side of the story. I don't agree that there will ever be any returns on big carbon-sucking machines. Like, that just doesn't make sense at all from everything that I know. But the other side is that it seems like there won't be big returns from regenerating soil in a human way, but I don't agree with that. I think that there will be huge savings, first of all, because farmers are locked in a cycle of debt that is causing them to be suicidal. The suicide rates of farmers in every country in the world is higher than its national average. What? They're growing our food for us and our fashion, and we're putting them into a situation with debt that puts such high pressure on their mental health that they don't want to live anymore. The debt cycle comes from buying chemicals, buying genetically modified seed to withstand those chemicals, and buying big heavy-duty machinery. So regenerative agriculture doesn't need any of those three things at all. So you save enormous amounts of money immediately. So when you talk about money saving rather than what you can invest in, suddenly it does make economical sense to look at the regenerative agricultural solution for climate change.